Hey, what's up, guys? How's it going? So, I wanted to go over a few things after KvK. Now, of course, how did KvK end up? Well, we ended up winning against some Kingdom 320, which was pretty awesome. Of course, how did I size up against everybody in the solo war? I came in at rank 40 at 32 million points. Now, I want to go ahead kind of give you a brief overview of just exactly how did I do this and how you could probably pull off doing this too, even if you're a high night player or somebody that's a little bit past 500 mil. Now, for the most part, right, most people, they go out, they say, you know what, you can't get rallied past 500 mil. You can't be a rally trap if you're 600 mil, 700 mil, or vice versa. And I'm not going to disagree. You really can't, might-wise, get away with rally trap. And what you can do, though, is you can mimic the proper formula necessary to be able to eat rallies. So what I ended up doing, right, and after time and tested, going through, making sure, I could test a dozen gajillion different ways to do this, what I ended up settling on was keeping all of my heroes on the wall that I wanted, including Rose Knight for my leader. Now, why I did that is because those are all my army attack heroes. Now, you're probably saying, well, how are you going to, why would people rally you? Well, here's the thing, right? As you can tell, I put a ton of resources in my bags. That's step number one. Step number two is you actually need to go out, pick yourself out a dart nest that you can rally. Now, as crazy as this sounds, right, you think, why is this important? Well, if I put a destroyer in here and all my leaders, what that's going to do is it's going to look like on a scout, I have no leader, and it's going to swap out all of my leaders for trash heroes on the wall. Granted, when you do that, most people are going to look at that and say, huh? Then they're going to see no research, research guy, and they're going to go, huh? And they're going to go, wait a minute, and so but the most important aspect of it, right, is obviously when done properly during KvK, you can get away with doing stuff like this. So, to kind of go over the report itself, just to briefly go over it anyway. As you can tell, and of course, if you want to look and see how that looks out, all said and done, right? But to actually watch the battle itself, you'll notice that what I did, that these guys probably should have paid attention to, was the fact that I popped a wall boost before they could do anything. This screws up their formation, which is always fun. Gotta love it when you can actually screw up their formation. But it pays to, to actually do this in this formulaic style. Now, of course, as you can tell, I pretty much was able to grab his leader, and it was an easy peasy kind of thing. It was as if they didn't even know what hit them. Of course, a lot of the time when guilds start, wanting to double rally, triple rally, it's logical, right? But it was interesting that this bait ended up working the way it did. So I hope that some of you guys out there might find this useful and might end up using it yourself. But needless to say, I can't even begin to describe how this ends up looking like. But needless to say, Anyway, so important concepts to understand, right? Of course, a lot of people ask about this, and I'll try to explain it the best way I can. But essentially, right, between the difference between like an infantry phalanx and a range wedge, or vice versa, phalanx or a wedge in any case. All right. The one thing you have to understand is really this bit here in defense, which is, are you in counter? All right. Big thing here, right? Am I in counter? And then the question becomes, all right, well, if I'm in counter, am I in counter to composition? Because that's what matters. All right. Don't let this confuse you. If this looks like a no-go failure, believe me, it's on the composition. So the main thing, all right, that determines a win in regards to rally trapping, all right, is the composition, and it's always the composition. So, for example, if I go range wedge, all right, to 2 million cavalry, that makes a hell of a lot more sense than it is to go infantry, cav, phalanx, vice versa. All right, because you're countering not the phalanx that they are using or the wedge that they are using. You are countering the composition that they are using. All right, now this only matters really in times where it's a purely one unit type situation. It may be different if, let's say, you had 900k split across. In those situations, pick and choose. But I would always stick with whatever counters the lineup. All right. Now, having that said, all right, the other thing that's really important to understand is your front line and your anti-front line. If you don't understand what that is, look, the front line, for the most part, is going to be whatever you declare your lineup to be. So if it is a range wedge, you have a range front line. The anti-front line, then, is not going to be cavalry, okay? Or is it? This is the problem, right? Most people get this screwed up, all right? Now, look, the easy answer to this is if I'm going to come at you at range, right, and you're in range wedge, then the one thing that counters you is what? Infantry, right? So that is your counter. So your anti-counter, therefore, would be cavalry. So if you want to stop people, right, the only two basically the only two stats matter at that point then are what? The range stats and the cav stats, okay? And that's important. Why? Because if I'm going to get hit in infantry, who's going to do the most damage at that point? Cavalry. So therefore, I need to increase that. Now, the second question then becomes, well, if my phalanx or my wedge is, range wedge versus range phalanx, what's the difference? Well, the easy difference is obviously what's in the back and what's in the second side. Okay, if the infantry is in the back, your infantry is going to hit last. Vice versa, if your cav is in the back, the cav is going to hit in the last. But, okay, ultimately, what is going to matter? If, let's say, I'm an infantry phalanx, but I'm not using any infantry, I have cavalry, and I have a lot of range, all right? And I'm going range wedge. What does that ultimately do in those situations? If you think about it for just a short while, you realize that if I've got a lot of range in the back and then some cavalry, and then I go range wedge, those range in the front are going to immediately hit the cavalry that are sitting here, if there is any infantry at all. All right. And then the cavalry is going to hit what? Probably my range and the cavalry. And then you have to ask yourself, well, is that really effective? No. So then you go, okay, well, what if I went range phalanx? Well, vice versa, okay? If you see how, okay, what's going to hit first, what's going to hit last, you could see that using a range phalanx is probably not such a great idea, because you're going to have range hitting your cavalry, and you're going to have cavalry hitting your infantry, and that's just not good, right? But then you have to think, well, then what's going to hit first? Well, it's probably going to be the cavalry in that case, right? Because if they don't have any infantry, well, is that going to hurt? Yeah, probably. But you have to think then are they all they using cavalry? Is it mostly a cavalry composition? Well, okay, that works great. But if it's a range full composition, right, then it's probably not such a great idea, okay? If somebody's in an imp phalanx, okay, you're probably better off in this situation, right? You either do an imp wedge, right, versus an imp phalanx, which is, sounds crazy, right? But in this situation, you've got, cavalry in range. So the only thing that matters at that point is going to be the range hitting their cavalry, and then you're going to have the infantry that's going to be hitting their range. That's the only reason why you'd ever do that. But if that makes any sense, hopefully it does. If it doesn't, look, just know that for the most part, whenever you go into a wedge, you're going to be splitting it, all right? Your front line's going to have this, this, this. That's all it does. It's just swapping the position of the units. And whether or not it's worth it to you, it really doesn't matter at the end of the day. But just look at what the composition is and what lineup it is, and using what I just told you, you'll be just fine. But of course, you always want to remember, what is the strength of the army that you're using? What is the strength of 2.3 million tier 4? You don't know these things. Look at the spreadsheet. That will tell you right away. And of course, obviously, as you guys all know, all right, what is the talent specs that I'm using? All right, I'll go this over once more. All right, I'm using squad offense, and I go down, max out the last, and then I fill up squad health, and then I leave the remainder of these empty because it doesn't seem to have really much purpose, in my opinion. If you want to know what my stats look like at the end, all right, remember, this guy was going mainly cav for the most part, at least when he was hitting the rally. All right, but I was popping this kind of gear. All right, this puts me at 484, 427, 442. All right, with 195, 221, and 418 for some HP stats. But that is what that looks like. Now, ultimately, yeah, does it help? You bet it does, but it's not necessary because at the end of the day, the composition is the king and determining the win. But needless to say, I hope you guys enjoyed the video, and I'll see you guys next time.